talking about my next listening project. I've already finished and reviewed on this channel The History of Rome by Mike Duncan. Then I took a brief detour to do King of Kings series by Dan Carlin, part of Hardcore History. But now I'm back to Mike Duncan again, and I'm going to start with the Revolutions podcast. Now, I've actually listened to much of this podcast series already, just kind of dipping in and out of it. I think I listened to the section on the English Revolution all the way through. I think I listened to most of the one on the American Revolution. I might have skipped the last couple episodes. I listened to most of the one on the French Revolution. I got a little bit impatient near the middle and started skipping to the points I was most interested in, but listened to most of it. I think I listened to the one on the Revolution of 1830 all the way through. I listened to the beginning of the one on 1848, although didn't make it very far into that one. I listened to the one on the Paris Commune all the way through. And he's currently, the podcast is actually currently unfinished as I'm making this video. He's currently doing the Russian Revolution. At first I was just skipping around and listening to random episodes in the Russian Revolution depending on what interested me. But at a certain point, once I decided that someday I was going to make a project out of this, once the weekly episodes started coming out, I just started listening to the weekly episodes when they came out, with the knowledge that someday I was going to go back and binge the whole thing, but just wanted to keep up with the new episodes, just to kind of see what would await me when I finally got around to binging it. And in fact, I've past few weeks I've even started doing little mini reviews of the latest episodes on the Revolution podcast as they come out. But I'm going to go back now and make a proper project of this. So the system I have when I do a podcast or audiobook is I listen to it 4 times in total before I review it. It's a bit of an overkill, I know, but it's the system I've developed. The reason being, sometimes when you listen to a podcast, your attention can wander, or you might not fully absorb all the information. It's not quite the same as reading a book. But by listening to it multiple times, I give myself multiple chances to catch all the information. At least that's the theory. That plus I just like listening to it multiple times. Helps me remember it more. And if it's, I don't know, quite often if it's worth listening to once, it's worth listening to twice, I think. Now, actually, I think what I'm going to do is do this season by season, and there are a couple reasons for that. Biggest reason is that I anticipate having a lot of thoughts on each season. Mike Duncan has divided this into seasons based on the Revolution. So, for example, the English Revolution is season 1. The American Revolution is season 2. And I could just hold all my thoughts in my head and just hope I remember everything I want to say and then just review it all at once. But I think I would feel better about it to just have a chance to offload all my thoughts at the end of each season. I don't know whether those thoughts would be of much interest to anyone else, but you know that what I do on this channel is a bit self-indulgent. I just ramble on for my own benefit because I like to talk through my thoughts. So that's what I'm going to do. Actually, the second reason for doing this is, again, as of this moment, he's not finished the Russian Revolution yet. And hopefully will not be finishing it anytime soon. I say hopefully because I really hope he goes into all the details. I mean, so far he's been doing an excellent job of it, and I just hope he continues that. Hopefully that will be much longer by the time he finishes it. Uh, Now, I mentioned before that my habit was to go through audiobook or podcast 4 times through. I think what I'm going to do, is do each season 3 times through. So do the English Revolution listen to it 3 times, then make a video reviewing it, then go on to the American Revolution, listen to that 3 times, then make a video reviewing it, etc. And what I'm going to do, I do these reviews in conjunction with my blog, where I've been writing written reviews. But I think what I'll do is just make the video reviews for the season by season. Then once I get up to the Russian Revolution, we'll see if by the time I listen through each other season 3 times, it's possible that could take me a while. Especially since I listen to these podcasts in bits and snippets throughout the day. I'm not someone who just sits and I don't currently have a job where I can sit down and listen to it for like 8 hours a day or something like that. So it's possible that by the time I work my way up to the Russian Revolution, he'll be finished with it. But if he's not, then I'll just take a break at that point. Wait for it to get finished, and then I'll jump in when it's finished. And then once I've finished doing the season by season reviews, then I'll listen to the whole thing from start to finish to try and get the whole sweep of it. And I think I'll only do that twice. So each season I'll listen to 3 times. The whole sweep of it I'll listen to twice, which will be 5 listenings in all. Hopefully it'll be enjoyable listenings. And then I'll come through with the final review for the whole thing. And I'll do a written review at that time with the blog, whenever that ends up being. That'll depend on a number of factors. Whenever Mike Duncan gets done with it, he's said that the Russian Revolution is going to be his last one. This is the last season, but it'll hopefully take him. It hopefully won't be finished anytime too soon. And then how quickly I can work through the rest. Yes, I'll be, regardless of when he finishes the Russian Revolution, I'll be doing video reviews of the previous seasons. So this particular video here is to announce the start of a new listening project. I've started doing what I call these started videos for new books and new podcasts, in which I talk through and I give my thoughts on why I'm starting this, what my background is, why I'm interested in it, etc., etc. It's very self-indulgent in the sense that it's mostly about me and my interests more than it is about the material. So anyone who doesn't want to watch this whole video, I don't blame you. But I find it useful for a couple of reasons. Well, one is just I just enjoy doing it and talking through my interests. But the other reason is I find it sometimes useful to get all this stuff out of the way, so that when I get to the actual review, I don't feel like I need to go back through my whole history. I can just get into the actual content of the review that much quicker. But I have spent most of my 20s absolutely fascinated by revolutions. So this podcast is right up my alley. I think, as best as I can recollect, and some of these recollections are a little bit hazy, but I think I was fascinated by revolutions even before I became ideological. So, for example, I remember reading a Tale of Two Cities in high school, and being fascinated by the build up to the French Revolution, and the various jocks in the tavern and all their plotting, and the idea that there was these wicked aristocrats going around, but then that there was a something fermenting up below the surface. Les Miserables as well. I didn't get around to reading the book actually until I was in college, but when I was in high school, I was familiar with the musical. I didn't actually see the musical until I was in college, but I was familiar with the musical through the soundtrack, and was just fascinated by the idea of the final stand up on the barricades. So just fascinated by the idea of the human drama of revolution. And I think there are a few science fiction, utopian science fiction movies or something I saw where there was a revolution part of that, which also fascinated me. And of course, there's a certain amount of what's the word? A certain amount of fantasy or projection on this. Like when you're watching this or reading about it, you imagine yourself as these brave heroes up on the barricades, right? Like you imagine yourself as in Les Miserables, in Rolius, is that how you pronounce his name? The leader of the barricades. Um, yeah, a certain amount of of trying to imagine yourself and those heroic acts, especially as a young person where you're predisposed to do that. But then after I became ideological, and developed leftist sympathies in college, I had come out of a conservative Christian environment, conservative Republican Christian environment, but then became liberal. And then after becoming liberal, as a lot of young people do at that age, there's a very quick swing on the political pendulum. Was more and more interested with radical politics. And then the fascination with revolutions takes on a political edge, right? The French revolutions, these are the good guys up against the bad guys, or the revolutions of 1848, the the people rising up against these corrupt governments, or the Russian Revolution, or all of this stuff is tempting to idealize. Now, of course, you idealize it up to a point, right? So you idealize the Russian Revolution in 1917. You don't idealize it so much after Stalin has gotten control of it, or you idealize the French Revolution in the early days. You don't idealize Robespierre's Reign of Terror. So there is always this cutoff point in a lot of these, but yes, and certainly the failure of a lot of these revolutions, or the tendency of these revolutions to devolve into dictatorships, is troubling. But it doesn't seem to stop a lot of people who are of similar temperament to me, because I'm going to include a lot of the other young radicals I have known over the years, to idealize this. And I was also a history nerd. I had come into college originally wanting to study ancient Roman history. So I was studying the classics, as they call it. But eventually decided I was just much more interested in the French Revolution and the modern era. So changed over to a general history degree. Um, yeah, and was fascinated by this stuff when I studied modern European history. I ended up with a general history degree and also certificate to teach history in secondary education. But then ended up abroad in Japan teaching English for the rest of my 20s, and not really sure what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Not really sure if I wanted to become a high school teacher or what I was doing. Uh, Teaching English in Japan was just supposed to be a temporary experience, but one that got longer and longer. Uh, and during that time, I found myself being spending a lot of time just reading about those French revolutions or the 1848 revolutions uh, or the Paris Commune, those events that were interesting to me. And eventually, I got the idea at one point. I had this idea which I had absorbed from my youth. They used to tell me when I was in school, or they used to tell my generation, um, you should find out what you love, and then you should pursue that as a career. And I thought to myself, oh, geez, if I'm spending my free time reading up on this stuff, maybe I should go back to school for a history degree and go into it. Um, which turned out, after some consideration, after a few years of consideration, I decided that idea was not practical. It took me a while to get there for a number of reasons. I think perhaps growing up, it wasn't exactly clear to me how limited the paths in academia are. It just seemed like something that was a viable option when it actually was not a viable option. Um, so I never ended up doing it, but I did try to. I did read up about it on my own. Actually, that being said, I should qualify that. Something that I often say on BookTube, if you watch this channel, I'm often confessing that I don't read nearly as much as I think I should, and especially on BookTube when people, there are a lot of people who are just ferocious readers. 100 pages a week is good for me. So I'm always trying to chip away at books. I'm always interested in books, but my reading speed is quite slow. Uh, I get easily distracted for one thing, especially in this day and age of social media and the internet. Probably my attention span is maybe not what it used to be. But then I've just always been a slow reader. I've always been the kind of person who goes over a paragraph and then realizes my mind has been wandering and goes over that paragraph again. So even though I was interested in this era of revolutions, I do have to confess that a lot of my reading was surface level. Wikipedia or watching videos on YouTube or stuff like that. So despite being fascinated by it for years of my life, and despite spending a lot of time on the internet reading Wikipedia entries or YouTube videos or stuff like that, I never really read up on it as much as I wanted to, or quite got an encyclopedic knowledge of it. The English Revolution I learned about mainly through historical fiction and BBC miniseries. I think the one nonfiction book I read on it was John Freeborn John, a biography of John Lilburn, who was one of the levelers. French Revolution, I've read some historical novels and then a few very basic histories. Revolutions of 1848, actually, I never really came across any books on that. It was something that interested me, something I looked up on Wikipedia and stuff like that. But yeah, didn't didn't never really read in depth about it, which was one of the reasons actually I liked Mike Duncan's series on the Revolution of 1830 so much. Uh, is because he's able to actually get a hold of a lot of interesting books on it and go through it in depth, which is something I'd always been curious about, but never really knew about, or knew about the. I mean, I knew about it in broad terms, but I didn't know the details about it. Revolutions of 1848. I read one really good book on that, which is Revolutions of 1848 by Priscilla Robertson. Um, it took me a while to get into it. It was a narrative history, but because there are so many different revolutions in the revolutions of 1848, um, it's like a whole series of separate stories. Um, and she tells the stories well, but I had a hard time getting into each separate story. It's like, okay, here's what's happening in Vienna now, and it's like, okay, I've got to learn all these new names, and okay, who are the moderates in Vienna, and who are the conservatives in Vienna, and who are the radicals, and what's going on. Kind of orientating yourself to each different city felt like a lot of intellectual work reading the book. So I made slow progress on it. Um, I've I've always been fascinated by the general idea of the revolutions of 1848, but a lot of the history books tend to be the ones I've come across are more analytical, trying to figure out, okay, what was going on, what were the commonalities, and I'm more like narrative history. Revolutions of 1848 by Priscilla Robertson was quite good in that regard. Paris Commune is the one I actually read the most on. And that was for a couple of reasons. One, I found the Paris Commune really fascinating. It was, it seemed like it was right at the crux between the classical revolutions, like the French Revolution. It was looking backwards to the French Revolution, but at the same time, it was looking forward to the communist revolutions of the 20th century. It also fascinated me because it seemed to encapsulate what seems to be the stereotypical dilemma is you have a bunch of radicals. They take control of the city. They need to quickly work together to consolidate their gains and protect the revolution, and they can't work together. They're just interested in squabbling with each other. And it's an open question whether or not the revolution would have survived anyways. But just all this squabbling with each other and not being able to form a coherent government when they really needed to. Seems like it's the story of the left over and over and over again. So I thought this was interesting to read up on. Also, I was in my 20s attempting to write a novel, which never came to anything. But it was about a revolutionary situation in a made up land. And when I wrote the first draft of it, I realized that I had no idea how to credibly move from the revolutionaries taking control of the city. So I was trying to use the Paris Commune as a model for what I was trying to do in my story, like trying to study the Paris Commune and saying, okay, how did the radicals actually take control of Paris, right? How did it go from one day the Republican government is in charge, and then the next day the radicals are in charge? Trying to read up and break that down. So I don't know. I read maybe about 7 books on the Paris Commune, a little bit more or something, which is good for me. I mean, if you only read 100 pages a week. There's a limited amount of books you can get through. I actually, it may have been about 10 or something. I read a few books on the Paris Commune. Um, and then the Russian Revolution. I I read a couple biographies, Lenin or Stalin. I've been, again, it's one of those things I've been meaning to read more of. Uh, really meaning to read 10 Days That Shook the World One Day, or Trotsky's biography, or something like that. But just have a general type knowledge of it. So yeah, I guess it's a long way of saying it was something that was long fascinating to me, and yet it's something that I don't quite have the in-depth knowledge uh, that maybe I would like to have, or that I should have. So, like when I listened to Mike Duncan's podcast on the Russian Revolution, the one that he's ongoing now, it's not like, oh yeah, I already know this stuff. It's like, oh yeah, this is fascinating. This is stuff I don't know. This is stuff I probably should have read up on, but never got around to. The exception to that is his one on the Paris Commune, which I did listen through, and which, um, yeah, that was the exception where I actually, that was the one time I knew more than he was saying in his podcast. I don't want to say I know more than he did, because I'm sure he did his research and he just decided to leave stuff out. But that was one time where I felt my knowledge was actually not improved. And that was actually the one time where I felt like there were some interesting stories and some interesting details he could have talked about, but he didn't. So for I guess now that I've brought it up, I'll just get into it briefly. Some of the old radicals from 1848 were still around in the Paris Commune. Some of them were in the Paris Commune. Some of them were not. Some of them, like Blanc, Louis Blanc, who had been one of the big radicals in 1848, opposed the Paris Commune. There were a number of different names, like Felix Payat, who was one of the leftovers from 1848, who was a big troublemaker in the Paris Commune, and caused a lot of the divisions there. Apologies for mispronouncing all the French names, by the way, but I mean, just for example, those were things I thought, I kind of wish he would have talked about that, and brought that into his discussion of the Paris Commune. But the Paris Commune aside, the rest of the stuff, when I'm listening to it, it's mostly talking about stuff that filling in a lot of details that I didn't know, to varying degrees. The French Revolution, when I was listening to that, it was a lot of stuff I did know, but some stuff I didn't know. Oh, right. And of course, there are seasons of stuff I know nothing about. The Haitian Revolution, his one on the Mexican Revolution, or the one on the South American Revolution. So yeah, I obviously have been mostly focused on the European revolutions, with the stuff I was reading. Um, yeah, when I was interested in this, I was mainly interested in the European revolutions during the period which is sometimes called the long 19th century, which is from long 19th century is a term that I think the historian Eric Hobsbawm coined, where you have the 19th century, but the 19th century starts with the French Revolution in 1789, and it ends with World War I in 1914. Now, of course, if you're interested in revolutions, there's a temptation to just make that 19th century a little bit longer and say, okay, it ends in 1917 with the Russian Revolution, or maybe 1918 with the German Revolution. But squeeze a couple more revolutions into that period. but yeah, that the European history during the long 19th century revolution. Sorry, yeah, European history during the long 19th century. Those revolutions were the ones I was interested in. I'm not quite sure why, to be honest. It was just something I was attracted to inherently. It's always sometimes figuring out why you like things are a little bit difficult. Um, I guess my best guess is trying to psychoanalyze myself is I've always liked history, so there's a fascination with older stuff, but this period is right kind of it's kind of old and it's kind of not that old, and you can read back a lot of modern politics into it. Uh, the 1848 period and stuff like that. But it's still old enough where it's got this air of mystique and being a different era. Um, and perhaps another reason is because the newer the revolutions are, the harder it is to romanticize them. So like the Vietnamese Revolution, the footage of the dead bodies is just too recent. Um, but you go back far enough in history to the Paris Commune, and those all those dead bodies um, just seemed it seems old enough that maybe it's more easy to idealize it or to romanticize it. I should actually clarify here. When I say things like that, I'm not trying to justify it. I'm trying to maybe confess. Confess maybe how I had this um, immature proclivity to romanticize some of the stuff from the Age of Revolution. And even when I was younger, even in my 20s, I knew that. And ideologically, I was a pacifist. Um, but I was still attracted to the stories of violence and turmoil uh, on, with the revolution, even though I ideologically was against violent revolution. I think there's just something about men maybe where we are attracted to stories of violence and I don't know. Even though we can know better, sometimes it's still tempting to go back to those stories. There's also, I mean, some people say that testosterone in men drops off around the age of 40 or something, or I don't know, middle aged. So I wonder if that could be a reason why those stories were so much more attractive to me when I was in my 20s. Uh, you know, I mean, I was never a manly man or anything like that, but I'm wondering if men who are nerds, like myself, react to the testosterone level not by being manly and playing sports, but by reading books that are about more action-packed things. Reading comic books about superheroes who punch people instead of punching people yourself, or something like that. And then maybe as the testosterone drops as you get older, you turn to other interests. I don't know. I'm somewhat just theorizing here. Um, but yeah, where was I going with this? Yeah, I do confess that a large part of this attraction to the revolutionary period in my youth was perhaps immature, which I kind of realized at the time, but couldn't help but feel attracted to it anyways. I've largely switched interest since I was about 30. Um, not, yeah, partly just because I don't know. After you've read enough on a certain topic, it's time to read on another topic, and I got interested in the British Empire through a few books that I picked up, and those were still in the long 19th century period, but just looking at a different aspect of it. And I started becoming really interested in, the British in Africa and the British in Singapore and Malaya and stuff like that. And again, the reading I did during that time uh, was only a handful of books, and then looking stuff up on Wikipedia. But it was something that was interesting to me. Um, oh, but yeah, sorry. The fascination with that period, uh, the long 19th century, and then I was also I considered the American Revolution and I consider the American Revolution almost kind of part of that age of revolution, because everybody knows about the connections between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and how those two revolutions acted on each other. So I consider the American Revolution sort of as a prelude to that. And then the English Revolution, or the English Civil War, was kind of like another prelude to that. The English Revolution fascinated me when I found out about it, because it was, like a lot of this stuff, completely absent from my American schooling. Uh, I had no idea about Oliver Cromwell or any of that. So once I found out about that, once I found out that there was this really turbulent period in English history that predated the French Revolution, um, and in some ways paralleled the French Revolution, I found out that was really interesting as well. So when I found out a few years ago about Mike Duncan, and I found out about him from a coworker who had also studied the classics in university, and he recommended it to me. And I found out Mike Duncan had done the History of Rome podcast. And then I found out that he was doing revolutions next, and I thought, oh, okay, well that syncs up with my interest quite nicely, something I had been interested in. Um, and yeah, Mike Duncan has a very similar definition than that I would. So he kind of the long 19th century, from the French Revolution, finishing with the Russian Revolution, but also squeezing in the English Revolution and the American Revolution. So yeah, that that lines up quite nicely with the period I'm also interested in. So I knew that was up my alley, and I knew I would listen to this someday. I just wanted to. I had other stuff I was listening to at the time, and then I wanted to do the history of Rome first, so cycle all the way through the history of Rome. Um, but yeah, I guess the only revolution that I wish Mike Duncan would have covered that he didn't, within that period, would have been the Greek Revolution. And I'm not quite sure why he didn't cover it. It's probably like on Reddit somewhere or something like that. Someone probably has asked him before and then asked me anything or something. But yeah, I don't know why he didn't cover the Greek Revolution. I can think of a couple guesses. One guess would be it was kind of more of a war of independence than it was a revolution. I mean, you could say the same thing about the American Revolution, but I think this is more true with the Greek one. Two is, I think it gets really confusing, and there's not a clear narrative through it. And there's a lot of different tribes and a lot of conflicting ideologies. But what would be interesting about the Greek Revolution is the way it attracted sympathetic Republicans and revolutionaries from all over Europe, who viewed this as this was back during the time when they viewed the fight against tyranny and absolutism as a universal struggle. And so if the Greeks were fighting to overthrow tyranny, that's something that all liberals in Europe had to support. And Eric Hobsbawm, whose book The Age of Revolution I really struggled with but found a little bit interesting, compares it to the Spanish Civil War in the 20th 20th century. Um, says it was like the 19th century version of the Spanish Civil War, and that it attracted volunteers from all over who wanted to help the cause of liberty. But yeah, other than not covering the Greek Revolution, it, Mike Duncan's interests and mine line up very nicely. I, as I've already confessed, I'm nowhere near as intelligent as him, nor capable of reading as much as he does. But I'm really looking forward to enjoying his Revolution series and working through it properly now. I've dipped in and out of it up until now. I'm sorry for rambling for so long. I really, for a started video that's not even a proper review, I really shouldn't talk for 40 minutes. It's done now, isn't it? It's done now. Okay.